Walter White watched his family starve for his pride before he ever cooked a single gram. That's not a theory. That's what happened. Season 1. Elliot Schwartz. Walt's old partner, the man who built a billion-dollar company on research Walt helped create, looks him in the eye and offers him a job. Good salary, excellent health insurance, the cancer treatment, covered. Everything Walter White claimed he needed. Everything his family needed. Walt said no. Not because the offer wasn't real. Not because Elliot didn't mean it. Because accepting it would have meant admitting that someone else succeeded where he didn't. And Walter White would rather let his family struggle than survive on someone else's terms. That decision happened before the Empire. Before the lies. Before Heisenberg. The mask slipped very early in the show. We just weren't watching closely enough. Let's go inside the fiction. Walter White told us exactly who he was the moment he broke into Jesse's home and said,
"But you know the business. And I know the chemistry. I'm thinking maybe you and I could partner up."
This is where most people get the story wrong. They think Walter cooked meth because he was desperate. But desperation doesn't explain why a man rejects free money, free health care, and a legitimate job, and then immediately goes looking for a criminal partnership instead. Desperation doesn't have a preference. Ego does. Walt didn't want to be saved. He wanted to be the one doing the saving. There's a difference, and that difference cost everyone around him everything. Walter gives his family about the cancer is one of the most carefully constructed lies in television history. And the brilliant part is that Walter probably believed it himself. I have people depending on me. I need to provide for my family. I have responsibilities. These weren't lies in the traditional sense. Walt wasn't sitting in a dark room plotting deception. He was doing something far more dangerous. He was building a story where his choices already made sense before he made them. Psychologists call it motivated reasoning. Walter White called it love. But watch what he actually does. He earns enough to cover the medical bills. The number he initially gave Jesse, $737,000, gets hit. And then he keeps cooking. He doesn't tell Skylar. He doesn't stop. He doesn't even slow down. The goalpost moved because the goal was never the money. The money was just the first story that fit. Then Jesse asks him in his home, "Why are they still going?" Walt says,
"I'm in the empire business."
"Not the family business, the empire business." He said that out loud, to Jesse, without hesitation, as if it was obvious. And it was obvious, to everyone except the version of Walter White who still needed to believe he was doing this for his son. To understand why the empire mattered more than the family, you have to go back to who Walter White was before Heisenberg. And what you find there is something no one in his life ever wanted to say out loud. Walter White was humiliated. Quietly, consistently, for decades. He co-founded Gray Matter Technologies as a young man. He was brilliant. Genuinely, objectively brilliant. He left, sold his share for $5,000, and watched his former partner turn that company into a $2 billion empire. He ended up teaching high school chemistry to students who didn't care, working a second job at a car wash on weekends, struggling to afford a baby on the way. Every day he walked into that school and wrote on that chalkboard was a reminder of everything he was supposed to be and wasn't. The cancer didn't create Walter White's rage. It unlocked it. And what came out wasn't grief. It wasn't fear. It was something that had been sitting there for 20 years, waiting for a reason to move. The cancer just gave him permission. A terminal diagnosis is the ultimate permission slip. It said, the rules don't apply to you anymore. Nothing to lose means nothing to protect. Nothing to protect means Heisenberg gets to come out. Here's the thing. The show wants you to notice, but never quite says directly. Walter White was miserable. Heisenberg was not. Watch the two versions of this man side by side. Walter White stutters in front of his students. He flinches when his boss humiliates him at the car wash. He sits across from his own family at the dinner table and doesn't know what to say. He's a ghost in his own life. Polite, invisible, and slowly disappearing. Then watch Heisenberg walk into a room.
You clearly don't know who you're talking to, so let me clue you in. I am not in danger, Skylar. I am the danger. A guy opens his door and gets shot, and you think that of me? No. I am the one who knocks.
That is not a man in crisis. That is a man arriving. There is no fear in that voice, no hesitation. What you're hearing is someone who has finally found the version of himself he always believed existed and spent 20 years being told was too much. The Say My Name scene. 3 drug distributors in the desert, and Walter White makes a grown man say Heisenberg like it's a confession. He doesn't need a weapon in that moment. He's enough. His reputation is enough. He is enough. And you can see it on his face. Not relief, not survival. Pure satisfaction. The happiest Walter White ever looked in 5 seasons was when someone was afraid of him. That's not a man protecting his family. That's a man finally feeling real. There's a scene in season 5 that breaks the whole myth open quietly. Skylar has been hollowed out. She knows everything. She's not fighting anymore, just surviving the same house as a man she no longer recognizes. And she asks him, almost without hope, to just let it go, to stop, to walk away before there's nothing left. Walter's response is the empire business logic applied to his marriage. He lists what he's built like a CEO, going over quarterly earnings. He talks about scale, about what he's created, about the operation and what it would mean to abandon it. He talks about legacy. He doesn't talk about her. He doesn't talk about Walter Jr. He doesn't talk about the baby, or the moment he gives Hank's murder coordinates to Skylar, knowing that Hank is dead, knowing that their lives are destroyed, framing it as victory. Who wins when their family is gone? Who sends that message? A man who decided the score still mattered even after the game ended in ruin. Or the lily of the valley. Walter poisoned a child. Brock Cantillo, a kid who had nothing to do with any of it, because Walt needed Jesse back in line. That didn't protect his family. It protected his operation. He calculated that a poisoned child was an acceptable cost to keep his empire intact. He made that calculation alone, in silence, with a plant in his backyard. There is no version of "I did it for my family" that survives that scene. At the very end, in the finale, Walter forces Elliot and Gretchen Schwartz to set up a trust fund for Walter Jr. He constructs an elaborate threat using Badger and Skinny Pete with laser pointers pretending to be assassins. He makes them swear they'll deliver the money after he's gone. This is supposed to look like the final act of a father. Last gesture, providing for his son one last time. But look at what he couldn't do. He couldn't call his son. He couldn't tell him the truth. He couldn't have a real conversation with the boy whose entire world he destroyed. What he could do was move money. What he could do was leverage and control and operate, because that's what Heisenberg knows how to do. Walter Jr. made it easy for us to see the truth when he found out. He didn't want the money. He said, on the phone, that Walt should just die. The son he said he did all of this for wanted nothing from him except an ending. And Walt gave him a trust fund instead of an apology, because a trust fund is something Heisenberg can give. An apology would have required Walter White to admit that Heisenberg was real, and that Walter White let him happen. He couldn't do that, not even at the end. Season 5. Final episode. Walter White is standing in a kitchen with the woman he married, the woman whose life he systematically dismantled over 5 years. And Skylar says the words she's been saying in various forms since season 2. Walter cuts her off. That's it. That's the confession. Not extracted, not forced, offered. He hands her the truth like he's putting down something heavy he's been carrying too long. And what's devastating about that moment isn't the admission. It's the relief in it. He sounds lighter saying it, like it's the first honest thing he's said in years. Because it is. That's it. That's the confession. Not extracted, not forced, offered. He hands her the truth like he's putting down something heavy he's been carrying too long. And what's devastating about that moment isn't the admission, it's the relief in it. He sounds lighter saying it, like it's the first honest thing he's said in years. Because it is. I was alive. That's the whole series in 3 words. Walter White spent 40 years being half alive. Competent, educated, overlooked, and invisible. And then he cooked meth and became someone. And it felt like being alive for the first time. And he chose that feeling over everything and everyone he claimed to love. He didn't break bad because his family needed saving. His family was the story he told, so he didn't have to admit what he actually needed. He needed to matter. He needed to be feared and respected and recognized. He needed to hear someone say his name and mean it. The family was the alibi. Heisenberg was the truth. It would be easier if Walter White were simply evil. Evil is clean. Evil doesn't keep you awake. What Walter White actually was is something harder to dismiss. He was a man who had a real wound. The humiliation was real. The waste of talent was real. The invisibility was real. Those 20 years of watching Elliot Schwartz live the life he should have had. That pain was genuine. But he took that wound, and instead of grieving it, he weaponized it. He used it to justify becoming something that destroyed the people closest to him, and he wrapped the whole thing in family, because it was the only word decent enough to make him feel decent about what he was doing. That's not villainy. That's something worse. That's a man who could have been loved, who was loved, who had a son who looked up to him and a daughter who would never know him, and chose significance over all of it. He got his name said. By distributors, by dealers, by the DEA, eventually by the whole country. Heisenberg. Everyone knew it. Walter Jr. still called him Mr. White on the phone like a stranger. And somewhere in those final hours, standing in that meth lab, looking at the thing he built, the one real thing he was ever proud of, Walter White understood exactly what the trade had cost him. And the tragedy is, he would probably make it again. Not for his family, for the feeling of being alive. This is Inside the Fiction. Subscribe for more videos like this.